You have made a positive impact already, Malyn. That's fantastic. So I guess handing over to the women in the room now. So just we have Malyn Mawby. Previously, prior to coming to Roseville College, has had a successful career in the corporate IT space in banking, finance and manufacturing systems. And she brings a wealth of experience and wisdom into her present career as an educator. So we're really excited to have you on board. Joining is also her colleague, Nikki Shires, who's Head of Digital Technologies and also STEAM Club Coordinator at Roseville College. Nikki, just a bit of background, teaches technology and applied science studies and leads the digital technologies at Roseville College. Obviously, with over 15 years of teaching experience, there's a lot of accumulated skills and knowledge in that digital technologies and STEM-related learning, which has helped to guide in this digital technology experience. So I'm very excited to have both of you joining part of our conversation today on a very interesting topic and obviously a wonderful opportunity to explore the great things happening at Roseville. So I guess I'd like to kick off, and Malyn, if I can begin with you, can you give us some tips for successfully implementing project-based learning in a digital environment?
Sure thing. Firstly, what is project-based learning? I should probably start with that one. So project-based learning is a way of putting everything together within a project. And a project meaning you have a goal and you have a start and you have an end, essentially, as a very simplistic way of defining what a project is. And it is a pedagogical approach in terms of teaching content and integrating process, tools, skills, etc. So my tips in making it successful, at least in my experience, is to really plan, particularly if you're involving technology. We know that when you're using digital technologies, then plan A may not necessarily be enough. So always have a backup plan. As a teacher, we have to connect whatever we do with the syllabus because we are quite time poor in the classroom. So whatever we do in the classroom has to somehow be justified by the fact that it is part of the syllabus or an extension or an enrichment. But ultimately, it needs to connect to what we have to teach. It's also a good idea, particularly with the digital technology platform, to leverage our options in terms of multimodal, not just delivery, but also for kids to be able to create their products in a multimodal way. What else? Oh, and a big thing that probably one of the last lessons I've learned with PBL, people have always said, the proponents of PBL said, you got to have a public audience, meaning you got to have an audience bigger than the classroom, bigger than the teacher and the other students. And I find that has actually helped with engagement and authenticity of projects. So having a public audience bigger than the classroom or beyond the classroom is another thing to kind of think about. Yeah.
So Malyn, I'd just like to take a little bit of an opportunity before we jump into Nikki's insights. When you talk about the audience being bigger than the classroom itself, can you talk about what that means and how you actually done that at Roseville?
Yeah, sure. So I've had different options. So some, for example, in my data science unit with my year 10s last year, modeling and simulations, we used one of our school data sets, which is the Moresby data set, which look at student skills and interests. And so as part of our audience for their data visualizations, I invited the careers professional here so that she could see how we have used the data. And even more interestingly is for her to see that having different people look at her data set, we actually see other things as well. So it's not just us winning, she was also winning. Another option is, because I teach computing, I try to get the digital product out there somehow. So for example, one of the things that I've started exploring is using GitHub to publish websites, for example. And another one, occasionally, once you start making things public, people do find you. And one of the stories there is when my students did a case study on artificial intelligence and the impact of artificial intelligence on society. So the students extrapolated their findings, or their analysis, I should say, in a sci-fi environment, the Marvel universe, in fact. And the DT Tech Hub, so Digital Technologies Hub, found our story and featured us. So if you're ever interested what year 10s could do, for example, then go into the Digital Tech Hubs and our story is there, and you can see the products that they have seen. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. A really nice way of connecting, I guess, school with the much wider business and broader community. So,
absolutely,
Nikki, I might just ask you for a few of your insights just around. Obviously, we did have a question through the chat panel, which is kind of going back and understanding what PBL actually. Give us a rundown from your perspective, and then I'm keen to hear what your successful tips are, in addition to obviously hearing what Malyn's shared with us.
Okay, thank you. I guess I would start with, I'm looking at it from a perspective of a whole school perspective. I'm looking at it from the junior school, senior school, and from co-curricular. And I would say that, speaking specifically of co-curricular, that is a really good place that we have found to trial PBL, and anything that is something that might be something that we can integrate into the classroom. Just like Malyn had said, we have to stick to the curriculum, and it's really important that we find everything we do has value in the classroom. And so using our co-curricular space like the STEAM Club, we've been able to sort of trial lots of different digital technologies specifically, but also project-based learning projects. And I think that's been really successful. The other thing I would mention is and I have an example in project-based learning in the junior school. I think with project-based learning, I don't know, I didn't actually see the question that was put up there, but just in my understanding of project-based learning is to be incorporating more than just your one subject or the one topic into one area of learning into a project, and also to bring that authenticity to it. And so I think everything that I try to co-create with the teachers at school, it does have that authenticity. And one of the examples we did last year in year 3 was we were trying to play with coding, and we do Lego robots to design something, and to try to integrate it into something that they already had going. And so we brought it into the art space, and we made art spinners. And we did that, myself and a teacher together. We sort of team taught together. And that is one of the really important things about the project-based learning and using digital technologies in schools, is to try to bring in more than just one expert and to teach it together. So then you can start to build on those skills for future. So everyone who starts to work there feels more empowered and able to use that in a deeper way. So those are 2 examples.
Brilliant. And can I just ask one deeper question just around the way that you are doing it at Roseville, which is that sort of co-curricular space. Can you just talk a little bit more about that? It's obviously not part of the core learning of that classroom. And so just give us a little bit of rundown about what that co-curricular looks like at Roseville.
Well, I guess it's shaped really by the students. We have had different cohorts come through, and every year I try to shape it with the students who are part of that club. And we design projects that are relevant for themselves, but also things that we might be interested in trying out in a classroom setting. And so it's after school activities. We generally, speaking to Malyn's topic about bringing authenticity into it and having an audience, one of the audiences that we have is the local community. And so we try to bring in what we do into the local community. So using the newsletter, for example, we're currently doing a robotics program that is for juniors from 5 and 6 and 7. But our senior students, years 8, 9, and 10, are the mentors, and they're actually running the program. And so giving them that platform to be leaders, to showcase their own learning and also deepen their own learning. that, and then putting that into the school community newsletter to share that with the community. All of those things are wins for us, and showing that not only robotics and coding can be done with girls, but also that it's a safe space for them, and they're really empowered there.
Wonderful, thank you. Malyn, I might just switch over to you for the next sort of interesting insight, which is obviously you both talk about the importance of embedding this within curriculum, and obviously a very crowded curriculum and time poor. So can you talk to us about obviously the outcomes and then the key considerations when assessing project-based learning? Like, what assessment framework do you use, and how does that kind of make the core outcomes of project-based learning?
Yeah, fantastic. I've also seen a couple of questions there about what project-based learning is. Now, there is no definitive description or explanation of what it really is. And if you Google what's the difference between PBL and inquiry and problem-based learning, which is typical in mathematics, for example, how are they all different? Well, I guess the main important thing about PBL really is that the L part. It is about learning. So we don't do projects as evidence of what they already know, but rather you do the project-based learning as literally you're learning as you're doing the project. And I think certainly from my experience in computing in the industry, we kind of did projects where we were learning as we go, because as technology evolves, you kind of like, okay, we've used the next programming language. Well, we better learn that one now because we need it right now. And it's kind of like that in a project-based learning. So the things that you want the kids to learn are embedded within the activities of the project. So as part of planning the project, you got to think about, how will I know that the students are actually learning the skills or the concepts that are part of the syllabus? So in terms of planning a PBL, I actually start from the end. So there is a nice framework for that from PBL Works, and it's called the gold standard of project-based learning, and they're very much outcomes-based. So they're saying, well, what are the outcomes that you want? Okay, so for these outcomes, then how can the kids show that they have hit those outcomes? And if they can show it that way, what do you need to teach them so that they can then do that as well? And so it's not unlike what we used to do in IT with our project management processes. We'll say, well, what's the end deliverable? And for us to develop this bit of software, what are the components of that software? And for us to develop those components, how do we then build that? And do we need to do any training so that we can do that? So it's very, very similar. So for me, doing PBL is like doing what I used to do in the industry. So to wrap up again, in short, so doing PBL is really planning what you want to assess at the end. So what do you want the kids to learn? How do you know that they have learned it? And how do you build in your teaching activities so that the learning activities that happen will then create this product that show that the kids have in fact learned something?
And Malyn, I know we talk a lot about empowering our learners and our students to be part of that process. To what degree do you actually empower your students in that?
Yeah, my favorite part. It's actually quite interesting because students have become so complicit in terms of what they need to do. And so what Nikki was saying earlier, that it's student driven. We can do it in extracurricular, so we're giving that opportunity. In the classroom, I try to do that by asking the students, what are you interested in? And then let's go for that. So say, for example, last year in year 9, IST, when we're doing microcontrollers, we were using Adafruit Circuit Playground Express. And then I said, what sort of applications might we use this for? And we just did a brainstorm. And ultimately, we went for to help with disabilities. And in our study of disabilities or accessibility, when we're studying web design, for example, we have learned, or the kids have learned, that disability is not just physical disability. You're also talking about cognitive disability as well. So that kind of came into the theme of the project itself. So But for us to get to that point of getting students to be confident enough that they can work on something that they're interested in, it does take a lot of relationship building, so that they can trust you, that they will come out of the whole project-based learning stuff, successful in the sense that they have built something, they have learned something. Yeah.
Wonderful. Nikki, I'm keen to hear your insights around that assessment framework. I know you're looking at it from a junior through to senior school and a whole school approach. Do you want to just share a couple of your insights in addition to Malyn's?
I look at the building frameworks around the skills in which that they can start to build. So sort of linking to what Malyn had said about really knowing what you're assessing when you're going into the PBL projects. You need to really be clear on what you're actually aiming to get at. So something I've actually learned working with Malyn is to try to build frameworks into our development of all of our programs, is to know where we're actually aiming to hit in by year 12 or beyond. And so starting all the way back to kindy and really highlighting what we are actually trying to attain as we go through. And so I'm starting to build a digital literacy framework for the whole school. I also have built in robotic encoding frameworks. So we sort of align the EdTech that we use with those different age groups, and we try to make sure that all of they are aligning with the skills that they're trying to eventually achieve. And so by doing that, then we start knowing those skills, and then we don't. I definitely think that you have to incorporate your student perspective, but not all classes have that flexibility. Year 7 and 8, there's a lot of students, and you don't have as much time to sort of open those doors. So we have to sort of build in those things for them. And so using those frameworks really helps. An example that Malyn and I actually have worked on was using exactly those things to build a technology unit that is in its nature, because technology is basically a project-based learning, which is why both Malyn and I love it, I think. It really incorporates such a range of skills, and we wanted to make sure that we were really highlighting to the students that they were doing that. They were learning multiple things at the same times, and so they could start making those links. So as we started to develop that program, we started to use a visual language to actually show when there were links to the maths curriculum, or there was links to the science or technology or engineering, whatever it was, and digital technology, all of those incorporated into that one. And so that for us really helped us shape that program that was already a pretty good program, but really starting to draw out those other things and really enrich that learning for the students.
So it definitely sounds like the programs are definitely around student insights and obviously creating student agency and interest in obviously the end result as well as the process or the journey. Can you talk to me about how do we encourage the collaboration between students digitally when they're working on these projects? And I guess especially in the light of COVID now. I'm not sure, Nikki, if you wanted to kick off, and then we asked Malyn to kind of come in and share her insights.
I think I'm going to let Malyn talk about that, because this was her question. So I think she has better insights on that.
Brilliant. Okay, over to you, Malyn.
All right. Collaboration, but particularly in assessment, is problematic in the sense that some students feel like, as we do as adults, that not everyone pulls their weight, or that some people who are more talented or more skilled end up doing more of the work. Now, some teachers would shy away from that and say, well, yeah, you're right, and marking group work is extremely difficult. However, I know from experience that if you're not exposed to a problem, then you wouldn't know how you would react if you're given that problem in the first place. So one of the things that I designed for my year 11 software students was to have a team project where they have to analyze existing modules or existing commercial systems out there and try to reverse engineer what it does. Now, this is what I planned in 2020. And of course, COVID hit. Now, what COVID has done is make it a lot more complex for me to run a group activity that is complex in itself already. And then you have this like, oh no, now they can't see each other. But what it did make me think was that, well, hold on, this is what I used to do working on global teams. If I could do it back then, way back then, surely we can do it now. Surely we have the tools. And so in fact, I did set up a Microsoft Teams site for my class and created little channels for all the different project teams, and within those channels they were able to collaborate, meaning they could work they could meet face to face, and I could join in those meetings, and they could do it synchronously, meaning when we're scheduled to be on, and asynchronously when they feel like it. And then also all their within teams, because they have their own channels, they have their own document space where they can work on their documentation. Yes, software design requires a lot of documentation, where they can work on their documentation with built-in version control, and I could go in and give them feedback. So essentially what I have done, without necessarily thinking about it too much when I first designed it, was create a little case, a context that was very, very much true to industry by virtue of the pandemic. The pandemic has forced us to work as if we were in virtual teams.
And are there any other, I guess, surprise outcomes that you found during COVID? Obviously, that's one of them in getting students to collaborate and interact. What are some other surprises that came out of that?
To be honest, well, a lot of my students actually said that was one of their highlights in 2020 in terms of their learning experiences. But a few of them actually said, so this is what my dad does, right? So I think there's still quite a few parents who are still working from home. And I think now they have a little bit more empathy with their parents who are actually working from home, knowing what the challenges were in terms of being challenged with just seeing them on odd occasions. And then you only see like this little fraction of a body instead of the whole, so you miss out on the whole body language kind of thing, and a whole lot of other missing cues because we're limited by the screen. So I think that one, the fact that they really enjoyed it because they felt it made the syllabus come alive, but then also the fact that they have more empathy for the adults and having a sense of what it might be like to work remotely is really fantastic. In fact, last year was the first time ever in my computing teaching career that I've never had to explain what teleconferencing or video conferencing was. It's like they all knew, like in the past, it was like this obscure little thing in the syllabus. Yeah.
Wonderful. I guess that leads nicely into an interesting question where we've talked a lot about student agency and students championing these projects. You've just kind of looked at and shared with us a bit of a surprise outcome, which is that parental impact at home and the working from home. Can you talk a little bit about how parents are on board and how you actually go about engaging the parents as equally as you do the students?
Well, curricularly, for me, I find, particularly with my senior students, I think most of their parents are actually working in IT. So, yay, the parents who are encouraging their daughters to actually do software. But other ways that I have engaged parents are to invite industry experts to actually come into my classroom. I haven't done it yet here in Roseville College, but previously, when I was, say, for example, in Barker College, I met a parent who happened to work at Google, and I said, oh, can I take my class? And he goes, yeah. So, that was a really good opportunity for us to then have an excursion to Google that he arranged. But I'd like Nikki to add on to that with the way she's also engaging parents.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I think I put a few notes on this because this is an interesting question for me. I think like the gentleman we're talking about earlier, it was a big shock to a lot of the parents having everything kind of come home and them seeing what was happening, and all of a sudden they're very engaged in the learning. And as a parent, I know that was challenging and really interesting. But I guess I think what's really most important to do is when we start designing things for students is to start with the students to get their sort of buy-in and their acceptance. And generally the rest will follow. I know that the parents, like one of the gentlemen said, that parents hardly know what's happening at school. And so for us, we obviously do care about what the parents want for the students, but they have trusted us as educators to sort of take them on their learning journey. And I think for me, it always comes back to getting that buy-in and that investment with the students. And so that's what both Malyn and I have both been talking about already through all of our designing of our assessments. I also think we've done something different last year. At the end of last year, we did a combination with science and technology, sort of a project-based learning, non-assessment project. And that was something that we thought we could successfully do because it was non-assessable. And I think parents are much more on board with that, because I think sometimes with project-based learning and students, not just parents, they get worried, like where are my marks going to go, and how is this going, how are these other people going to affect my marks? And so this is more for the senior students, of course. But and so we ran this engineering science fair, which was very time poor in the time that we did just because of COVID, but it was hugely successful for the time that we gave it. And that is mainly because there was no pressure from the students to have an assessment mark at the end of it. So they could be really open to that collaborative learning and to all the soft skills that you learn from that project-based type learning. And of course, we used the newsletter and all the kind of media outlets for the parents to see that kind of learning happening. And I think that for me is the way to get that buy-in from the parents. But yeah, I mean, that's not the one-stop solution, but that is one way that we've done it.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, you've just highlighted with that particular project, in fact, that we had a bigger audience, because at the end of the engineering project, engineering unit, if you like, we had a showcase. So essentially, just going back to what I said earlier about having an audience that's bigger than just the classroom, that was exactly one of it, and also being able to share through other platforms such as the newsletter. So it gives them another audience, and I think the kids like being accountable to people other than themselves and the teacher. So when you tell them, and I do with the PBL, that if it's going to be public, I tell them right from the beginning, so they know straight away that the audience is beyond just me and the marks. It's beyond that, and they can use it. And more I say this to the kids, that they can use it as part of their portfolio. This is something that they should work towards being proud of, because it's going to be out there. So yeah, it's not just parents, beyond parents too. Yeah.
And I think that one of the questions coming through the chat panel is very much around, should we move away from assessment to data gathering, which on the right things? Can you maybe comment on that and your insights there?
Well, I'm a data nerd. I love data, but I also know the limitations of data. And the limitations, the constraints of the school. Whether we like it or not, schools are accountable in terms of what we teach and how we assess what we teach. And unfortunately, I don't think there's any, unless we change the entire education structure, I don't think there's any running away from assessments and collecting those data. Now, being a data nerd, however, I do know that there are other ways of collecting data other than assessments, and there are other. You should not be limited by an assessment to make whatever you do meaningful. And the way I see it is that data is just data unless you build a story around it. And we teachers and students alike, we have an opportunity to shape that story. And we can either just say, well, this is just an assessment, or we can say, you know what, this is one way to prove that I can do this, this, and that. And I think it's a reframing, as I'd like to say. You reframe this. We have to do the assessment. Yeah, well, okay, fine. Now, do you take that as a limitation, or do you take that as a springboard for other things? Enrich what we're currently doing. Yeah. I get off my high horse now.
Well, I guess in that reframing that you talk about, who do you have to convince more? Principal, parent, student?
Myself. I have to convince myself
teachers,
every time.
The brunt of the load doesn't fall onto the teacher.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's a whole school shift. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that, but I know that it is definitely trending at schools at the moment, and it takes more than just the principal to decide that. You have to get everyone on board, because the teachers are expected to shift a lot of the way they gather their data for assessment or understanding of their students. So. But I am not the expert in data. Malyn is.
Excellent.
Excellent. Some very interesting kind of discussions around assessment and data. I guess just changing the lens just slightly, there has been some questions just through the chat around, I guess, girls in STEM. But does that really, in terms of the overall success in STEM, is that the focus? Or what are the high level considerations we need to make to engage all in STEM and these project-based kind of approaches?
I can start with my thoughts on that. Just being at an all-girls school has been a completely interesting experience to see how STEM or STEM-related subjects are taken in by girls. Definitely when you're in an all-girls space, there is more scope, there's more space for them to feel that they can achieve in those without the competition of the boys. But my lens, I don't know if that's the right word for it, but I don't look at it like that. I look at it, how do I get my students to be interested in what I'm teaching them? And if it's robotics or coding, I say, okay, what is it going to take to get them their buy-in? And for me, with girls, it is sometimes different to what boys want, and that could be subject. Like, for example, Malyn had said they chose to do gadgets for people with disabilities, and that's what they chose. But for my the way I would definitely frame it is, it's not a girl thing. It's just how do you get them to buy in? And what I have found from my personal experience at Roseville College is to angle it in different ways, not to always put it with the coding and this and that, but to bring in other aspects and let them enjoy that experience. And usually creativity comes and really creativity is one of the soft skills that we need anyway. And so if you can get them to go in that door, all the rest will come.
Excellent. Malyn, have you got
it? Oh my gosh. Do we have time for this? Right. This is something that I'm very, very passionate about, because I work in the industry. And for a very long time, the narrative has been talking about it's a pipeline problem, right? We need more kids, more girls going in. But I see it as there's a whole lot more. There's loads of problems. There's a pipeline problem, which is not as bad, I think, as the leaky pipe problem. We're losing people, or the leaky bucket. And I think that's one of the biggest problems. Girls, I think, are quite long-term in their thinking, right? And so if they don't see themselves being in a STEM career for a very long time, they might not stay. They might be interested now, but they may not even go there if they can't see their future in there. So I think if we are really going to address this, and I look at this not just from a gender perspective, but really from an inclusivity perspective. This is what I talk about when we talk about ethics, social ethical impacts within my courses, is that the issue of diversity and inclusion. And gender is certainly the most important, well, not most important, but it's probably the most visible manifestation of it, but it's beyond that. And every time I can make a point of that within my classrooms, I tell them that. And I tell them that you cannot fix something by being out of it, but by being in it. So that's kind of how I try to encourage the girls to say, if you're finding injustices in the world and now that computing allows you to scale, can you imagine what you can do if you're part of it? So it's sort of like helping them imagine what they can do if they just attempt and not give up straight away, and not kind of like be swayed too much about what they see, but like really more about imagining what they can be and what they can do by creating technology, by being empowered by technology, and by really, my mantra is make technology more humane. And I think we can only do that by really accepting the differences that we have, whether it's by gender or by ability or by skin color. Look at me, like, you know, I'm Asian. Then, you know, the more diversity is, the richer we are. And we can only do that if we all participate.
I feel like we could go on a lot in
yeah.
and I wish we had a lot more time. I guess just to look, you talk a lot, both of you have talked a lot about creativity, obviously keeping that engagement for particularly the girls long term. We've got consumers versus creators of these sort of digital technologies. It might actually be a nice opportunity for you to share sort of your lens through the creating mode versus the consumer mode and how you kind of build that long-term involvement in STEM programs.
Nikki.
All right, I'll start. Just because I'll start in the junior school. I have noticed that ever since the digital technologies and science curriculum has come into K-6, there's a lot of new language to learn. And so what we've done is we've taken that language and we've made that common. And so I think for us, that's the way we have started that journey with the girls, to shift from consumer to creator, is to immediately say, empower them with the language. And so when they start to design something, maybe 2 years ago, it would have been very similar to just a gamification of something, but now they're using the language and they're going, actually, I could be a creator for this, and that just shift in their mind is such a lovely thing to see in the junior levels. And I've been at Roseville College for a few years now. I'm starting to see that coming through, and I think it takes time. That kind of thing does take time to shift. But for me, absolutely really important for them to know that they can be creators, not just consumers, and starting from the very onset of their learning journey.
Wonderful. Malyn, I know this would be our last question, so I'm keen to see if any insights to share on that question as well.
Okay. I think because, as Nikki said, we teach technology, so that's our faculty. We definitely teach them to be consumers of technology as well as creators of technology. I think one of the challenges that I'm not sure many non-technology teachers are aware of is that it's actually very difficult to manage the expectations of students. So if you're, for example, you've got a gamer student and then you say, all right, for this one, we're going to create games. It's very difficult for them to realize that what they can do may not necessarily even approximate the games that they play that have been developed by professional developers. So I think just a word of caution, I guess, certainly encourage students to realize that they are creators. But I think as adults, as the teachers in the room, it is our job to help them manage their expectations to what they can create within a given set of, within a particular time frame. And they will get there. I have no doubt that they will get there if they choose to, but they may not get there in the 4 weeks that we have our PBL on.
Yeah, I think that's really realistic insights for all of us to learn, particularly, I guess, the students that we're working with in that classroom. Malyn and Nikki, we could go on for another hour, I'm sure. It's an area that I love speaking about. I really thank you on behalf of all of us for your time and your really valuable insights around project-based learning in that digital environment, particularly at Roseville. So thank you so much for your time. I wish we had more opportunity to discuss those further questions, but thank you again. Really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.